We had the federal budget this week. Not only was there no solution to inflation offered in the budget that was produced, such as through lower spending, but the very relief that Treasurer Chalmers offered for the cost of living in the budget is likely to have the effect of driving inflation and interest rates up. And it's the last thing that families need. My Menzies Research Centre colleague, James Mathias, has some interesting research to share about whether the budget delivered on what Australians are really needing right now. And it might surprise Labor. It shows that the cost of groceries has now leapfrogged every other cost of living concern, edging ahead of housing as the primary pain point. And yet, there was precious little in the budget to recognise that pain. James, welcome to the program. Tell us what your research examined and what we can take from it.
Yeah, sure, Amanda. In the biggest political week of the year, the budget released last Tuesday, we went out and surveyed over 1,000 Australians as to their reaction to the budget. And what we found would be very uncomfortable for Jim Chalmers and the government, insofar as 57% of people were actually completely neutral towards the budget. And 21% of people said that they were in favour and that was good for their family, and 22% against. So in terms of the reaction that Australians were having to the budget, everybody's very much undecided. When you do a comparison back to the Frydenberg budget, a whole lot more people, more Australians were actually on board with what he was producing as to what Jim Chalmers was producing. And then we asked people, out of the budget that was released, what was the single item within that budget that would most assist them and their families? And the results were startling. 44%, or over 44% of people came back and selected the line item that says there was nothing in the federal budget that would assist me and my families, followed tailing off to rental assistance and assistance to go to the doctor. So in terms of the budget that was delivered on Tuesday night, Amanda, it really has been a bit of a stinker for the government.
That really does reflect, I think, the fact that the budget offered very little for Middle Australia. While there was some help offered for people on very low incomes, for working Australians, there was precious little. So what does it mean for the policy that our political class needs to deliver to be able to deal with Australians' anxieties that we have this data to work with?
Yeah, good. And it's an incredible question, Amanda. And we also asked a follow-up question to the same respondents as to, first and foremost, what priorities they would like to see the government taking forward. And 61% of people, when presented with the option of spend more or spend less, 61% of people came in and said the government should be spending less to help curb inflation for me and my family. And, you know, that's evidenced in cost of living, cost of living, cost of living. This is the number one thing driving Australian households at the moment. And when you think about what this budget did and what was delivered on Tuesday night, it's more reactionary than anything else. If they say there's a cost of living crisis, say in electricity, I will rob Peter to pay Paul. We'll put $3 billion worth of subsidies into households to pay for increasing electricity bills, rather than address the actual root cause of what it is in supply and the electricity grid. We'll put $2.7 billion into the rental market to help assist with rental affordability, rather than solve housing supply problems and rental frameworks to get more properties into the rental market. Reactionary rather than looking forward and actually addressing what the problems are.
I think that's right. And when we look at the pie graph that we had up a moment ago, it shows that Australians do have an appreciation of how higher spending drives inflation. And it shows that the budget has done exactly the opposite of what Australians know needs to be done to rein in the cost of living. It's really very interesting because the relief that's been put together by Chalmers and the Labor team seems to operate on the assumption that the only way to get Australians on board to see that there is action being taken is through handouts. That graph tells us that Australians are capable of understanding what's needed to bring down inflation.
That's right. And, you can further ask the question to people, why do you think that the budget's actually in surplus? Was it good economic management by the government, or was it increased revenue through a higher tax take through personal incomes and mining royalties? And I'd hazard a guess, Amanda, that those same people who identify more spending in Canberra hits your back pocket hard would identify that this budget, it's in surplus, but it's not because of good economic management. It's actually because of the government's getting lucky in terms of increased tax take.
One of the kindest things that the government could have done with that surplus would be to index the tax brackets that Australians are subjected to for income tax, because that would provide real relief for individuals as they go about balancing all of the costs that they face while working and also paying tax. But instead, Treasurer Chalmers has taken more tax from that working middle class and chosen to redistribute it as the Santa he wants to be. So how well does the budget effectively go about targeting Australians' long-term concerns about the cost of living?
Well, it really doesn't. In fact, it does quite the opposite. What this budget did on Tuesday night was bake in an additional $185 billion worth of spending, which will be really hard to claw back or to roll back in future years. You don't bake in $185 billion of an additional spending lightly. And first and foremost, they shouldn't have done that. Now, secondly, when you look at it and you say, well, how is Australia tracking on inflation measures against other G7 nations? Well, our inflation is much higher and is expected to be higher. Amanda, there are twice as many companies in this country now going into insolvency than there was a year ago. Moody's said last month that the average, the percentage of income that Australians are having to pay, dual income Australian households are having to pay for their mortgages has risen in just 1 year from 25% to 31% of take-home income. Now, when you look at all of these factors and you look at what they delivered on Tuesday night and you say, where is the structural change? Where is the vision to ensure that in future years we can't just rely and rest on our laurels as to increase tax takes from mining and a low unemployment rate and income coming in from there? Where's the structural change that makes it hard decisions now to ensure that inflation comes down, the housing market eases off, and we can increase the housing stock for rental affordability? Where was that on Tuesday night?
Yeah, sorry, James. The thing that I think is the big takeaway here is that Australians are no longer thinking about their aspirations, the next house they want to buy or the holiday they want to plan or the special education they want to get for their kids. They're actually anxious about, can I afford to put groceries into our kitchen and dinner on the table? And that is a huge mindset change that speaks to the hardship Australians are facing right now. Thank you very much, James, for that really interesting information.